Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us here this afternoon. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson Booksellers is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, in the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. It's always so lovely to see so many people out for the celebration of a debut novel. So thank you all for coming out to this up-and-coming authors event. We're thrilled that Doubleday Canada could help to present this event, along with Penguin Random House of Canada, and of course, our good friends at the Winnipeg Comedy Festival, who are co-presenting this afternoon. We are here to hear a little bit more from Brent Butt, who is here to celebrate his debut novel, Huge. And Dean Jenkinson of the Comedy Festival will be out in just a moment to chat with him about that. So to give you a sense of how the rhythm of the afternoon will go, there'll be a bit of a conversation that'll take place on the stools to my left. Then we'll be treated to a reading from the book, a little bit more of a conversation, and then questions from you folks. So just to put that in your brain right now, feel free to start formulating any questions you might have. When it comes time to the Q&A, just raise your hand and I'll run over to you with this microphone. It's not because we don't believe you can project your voice. It just ensures that those watching at home can hear the questions and prevents us from having to repeat them. If you are one of those people watching on YouTube, just write any questions you might have in the chat and we will put them to the author as time permits. Now, Huge is a twisted thriller about three stand-up comedians who have embarked on a tour of smaller communities across a remote stretch of rural Canadian countryside. When one of the comedians starts to show signs of a terrifying capacity for brutality offstage too, the tour becomes less about getting laughs and more about getting off the road alive. I've always found Brent Butt funny. This is the first time I've ever been vaguely frightened by him. So you have a lot to look forward to this afternoon. In the words of Rachel Talali, the director of Sherlock and Doctor Who, the Huge is full of ironic humor, but I still found myself scared, very scared, like Silence of the Lambs scared. So there's a treat ahead for you. Our host for this afternoon, Dean Jenkinson, is an award-winning comedy writer, performer, and festival producer. You've seen him on Winnipeg Comedy Festival, Comedy Now, and Bear Farce, and heard him on The Debaters, Laugh Out Loud, and Sirius XM. He's written for 22 Minutes for 15 seasons and Just for Laugh galas since 2012. In 2019, he became artistic director of the Winnipeg Comedy Festival. Some of you may know our guest of honor, Brent Butt, who has made his home in Vancouver for 30 years, but was born and raised in Tisdale, Saskatchewan. After high school, he worked as a drywaller, salesperson, comic book artist, and darkroom technician before deciding to pursue his real dream. And in February of '88, Butt performed stand-up comedy for the very first time at an amateur night at a Saskatoon comedy club. He is now considered one of the funniest people in Canada with a career in stand-up comedy that stretches into 5 decades, including numerous appearances at major festivals in multiple countries and being voted best male stand-up in Canada by his peers in the profession. He also created and starred in 2 successful sitcoms, Corner Gas, the funniest show on TV as voted by TV Guide readers, currently showing in 60 countries, and Hiccups, a multiple Leo and Writers Guild Award winner. When you add in 2 theatrical comedy films, No Clue and Corner Gas the Movie, and 4 seasons of an animated Corner Gas spinoff, it may seem surprising that Brent's latest venture, literature, has taken a rather dark turn. Please join me in welcoming Brent Butt and Dean Jenkinson.
I was surprised there were a whole bunch of people on this side too. I was around the other side of the shelf and I thought that was the group.
Hi, Brent Butt.
Hi, Dean Jenkinson.
Hi, everybody who came. Thank you for coming. Thank you, everybody.
Oh yeah, I forget we're on YouTube.
We're on YouTube as well.
What a time to be alive.
This is being not just streamed, I'm told, but it will be available afterwards. So if you want to go home and relive any of the moments, this will be up there in perpetuity. No pressure.
Yeah.
So best-selling author, Brent Butt, how does that sound?
Yeah, that sounded pretty cool. We found out it was the #1 national bestseller on the Canadian fiction list.
That's pretty...
so thanks to anybody who bought the book or told somebody to buy the book.
When did you get in your head, I would like to write a fiction book?
Very early on in my life. When I was a little kid, I just my whole day was just sitting and drawing and writing stories. And I made a list of things, probably when I was 13, I made a list of things that I want to write professionally at some point in my grown-up life.
Right.
And I've been fortunate to do a lot of those. But novel was sort of the big, that was the whale.
That was the lofty, write a movie, no problem.
Yeah.
Write a TV series, no problem.
I was able to do like a lot of those things. I wanted to write TV, wanted to write movies, wanted to write comic books, wanted to write stand-up. And, but it's understandable that you put the novel one off because it's, it's going to be the most work. But also I was pretty busy writing scripts for pretty much 25 years or so,
Right.
just writing TV scripts. So I kind of didn't have the time. That was my excuse.
And when you sat down and you started writing the book, was it as much work? Was it as daunting as you feared it might be?
It was a lot of work, but I was surprised how much I really enjoyed the process because I didn't know going into it. I knew I was going to try to write a novel, but I didn't know if I would be able to, and I didn't know if I would even like it. But I knew I was going to give it a whirl. And I think the thing that surprised me most was how much I just loved the process. I think after writing scripts for so long, which are very, they're very structured. The TV scripts, it's like our scripts in Corner Gas were like 31 1/3 pages, right? And you have to be out of act 1 by, between page 7 and page 9. And so it's sort of regimented. Within that structure, you can have a lot of fun, but it's very structured. And to be able to sit down and write long form prose was really liberating. I told my agent, I said, I felt like a horse that had been let out of the pen. And they just said, just go run wherever you want to run. You want to walk and eat grass? You want to run as fast as you can? Do whatever you want to do. That's how I felt like when I was writing the novel.
That's very exciting. So
and also, you could write what people are thinking, which is a very difficult thing to do in a script. Normally you have to just write what you can film, but being able to write what people are thinking or write what people are feeling or quickly and easily
convey that to the reader in a way that you can't
in a way you can't with a script. Yeah. So that I found very liberating too.
That's very cool. And I like the phrase, give it a whirl. If you're thinking of being an author, give it a whirl.
Give it a whirl.
Just sit down and see where it goes.
There's no heavy lifting. There's very little risk of injury. Give it a whirl.
Give it a whirl.
I just kind of thought, I've sucked at other things. So if I suck at this, put it on the pile,
Give yourself permission to suck. It's very liberating.
It is.
You don't have the bar very high. You just look, I got over that again today. And I got back over it. It's amazing. So it is a darker tone, as we've heard. I've read the book, Honest. And was it a challenge to sell that to a publisher? Like, because I would imagine if Brent Butt approaches a publisher and says, hey, I'm thinking of writing a book, they'd be like, Tales from Corner Gas. We would love to hear behind the scenes of what it was like to make TV magic for all those years. You're like, no, I want it to be fiction. And then they think, well, that sounds great, but they're imagining what they know you from, I imagine.
Yeah.
And when you say to them, okay, but what I'd like to do, did you get any trepidation?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the way it came about was kind of funny because I was writing the book on my own. I hadn't approached anybody because, like I said, I didn't know if I'd be able to write a book. So I didn't want to say to somebody, I didn't want to make a deal to write a book and then 3 chapters in go, wow, I'm just really no good at this.
I gave myself permission to suck and I took too much liberty with it.
Yeah. So I wanted to give myself permission to suck and be the only one who knew that I sucked.
Right.
So I was writing the novel and I got approached by a publisher very independently out of nowhere saying, we're interested in the idea of you doing a book. Do you have any interest in doing a book? And I said, well, it's funny, you should ask. I'm
Manuscript.
I'm in the middle of, or I just finished actually. Because I'll tell you, it was kind of a creepy story actually. Not creepy, but kind of weird and profound. I was writing the novel and I would get up early every morning and write. And, my wife would come downstairs a little while later. And there was one morning when I had just finished, I was coming to the end. I knew this was the final scene. And my wife came downstairs and I said to her, hey, you want to see something? come here. And she came over, looked over my shoulder, and I wrote the end. And I was finished writing the novel. And so she gave me a hug and was celebratory and congratulations. Then I opened up my email, and there was an email from the publisher saying, when could we have a meeting about the book? So I said to them, it's funny you should ask, because I just wrote a novel, or I just wrote a book. And they were like, great. And you could tell they were kind of hoping it would be kind of like Brent Butt picks his favorite hot dogs around the country. Where they get the best hot dogs in Canada.
And you have that book inside.
And I said to them, it's a dark, violent, psychological thriller. And they were like, oh, okay.
Stephen King's gonna pick the hot dogs.
Yeah. But they were kind of flummoxed by that, but they were also intrigued. And they said, well, when you're ready to let us have a look at it, we'll have a look at it. And I went through a number of drafts of the manuscript, and I was able to get some very good advice from writers that I know that I had let read copies of the early manuscripts, including Linwood Barclay, who's one of my favorite writers. And I got to know him a little bit over the years. And he's a master thriller writer. He's one of the best on the planet doing it. And he agreed to read an early transcript or an early manuscript of Huge, and gave me some very constructive criticism, and other writers that I know. So I went through a number of iterations of the manuscript before I was ready to let the publisher see it.
Was it like, did it go from this long to that long or something?
Yeah, I overwrite. It's kind of how. And I sort of do that with scripts a bit, but you can't do it to the degree that you can do it with novel writing, which I think is one of the reasons I love it so much, is that I write and write and write and write, knowing, being pretty aware that a lot of this isn't going to make the cut. But you write, especially dialogue, I write tons and tons of dialogue between the characters, and you find things out about the characters, little things about their history, and they start answering questions that the other character asks, and you start finding all this stuff out. And you pick little nuggets that you go, oh, well, if he thinks that about this, then I could make him have this opinion earlier. And you just find out about the characters, and then you sort of slough all the sludge away.
Right.
You keep the little nuggets, the diamonds that you find. But yeah, so the original manuscript was probably, I don't know, 95,000 words, something like that. And I think this published book is about 83,000.
Okay. Let's talk about the characters. So there's three main characters, all comedians at various places in their career. One's an old road veteran named Dale.
Yeah.
And then you have a young, new, hot female Irish comedian, Rin. And then Hobie, this would be Hobie on the front cover there. Hobie, Huge, as he calls himself.
Yeah.
And Hobie is new to comedy. Overestimates his abilities at comedy,
As some do.
as some do. And we learn also has a very dark side.
Yeah, it's got a bit of history.
Yeah. And you do, I was gonna maybe save this, but you do a very, I thought, sensitive job of, there's a lot of empathy for Hobie. He's a monster often, and he's capable of incredible violence and murder, but you peel back a lot of layers as to his past and his trauma and his pain and where all of this came from, and how important was that, not just to make him sort of this soulless murdering machine, but sort of someone you can say there, but for the grace of God.
Yeah, I wouldn't say going into it, it was a notion, but it was through the process of writing. I mean, there's kind of that question of, well, why is he like this? Where does this come from? And you start thinking about that as you're writing. And, he's a guy who suffered through some, very bizarre, traumatic, difficult situations as a kid. Because nobody comes from nothing, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, the idea that monsters come from somewhere. Monsters are, I think, usually created. I'm sure now and then some just drop to earth, fully formed, ready to mangle. But I think for the most part, monsters are created. They're formed by experiences, the same way we all are. It's just that most of us don't have experiences that sort of push us in that direction. And so Hobie's he's a guy with a past, and a guy that he grew up big. It's like he said, I grew up strong, and that's a deadly combination. Somebody that has a great capacity for violence and a great physical ability for violence. And if you're faced with somebody or something like that, it's you feel very vulnerable. But yeah, like I said, I don't think I went into it thinking I need to make sure we know what Hobie's about. It just sort of developed through writing. I was kind of answering my own questions.
Right. And tell us about the other two characters and what make them the other 2 points of the triangle here in this story.
Well, I think there's aspects of me in both of these people for sure. So Dale is somebody who's been around a while at the craft. He's good at what he does. He's actually a very good comedian, but he didn't get any breaks. And sometimes, you need to get lucky a little bit. You need to be good, you need to be prepared, and you need to do the work, but you also need to get some breaks. And I mean, how many incredibly funny people do we know that nobody knows here? Nobody knows the name of some of the funniest people on the planet, right? Because for one reason or another, things didn't fall their way. Dale is like that. Dale's really good at what he does, but he's never had the breaks. He's in his 40s. He's thinking, he's got a daughter that is going to college. He needs to make some money, and he has an offer to sort of get out of the business and get a regular job. And the stability of that is so he's weighing whether he should let the dream die or not. And so there's part of me, I could see myself, had I not had some of the breaks that I had and some of the success that I had, I could see myself at some point in my life going like, well, how long do I keep kicking this dream around, right? And so there was, I could relate to Dale in that way. And then Rin is somebody who, again, she's good at what she does, but she's got a bit of Hollywood heat, and she's on the verge of a TV shot. And so there's that part of me in Rin that is experiencing that sort of excitement of like, I might be able to, break into show business in a bigger way than I was anticipating.
And she's younger. She's like what? 20,
yeah, she's in her mid-20s.
Yeah,
26, I think she is in the book.
And they're all kind of in this transition, this possibility of the next chapter around the next corner. But
yeah, one going up, one going down. Yeah. Dale's from Chicago. He's played through Canada before. Rin is from Dublin, Ireland, and then Hobie is a local Winnipeg lad.
Winnipeg plays large, and I was going to ask you. Rumors Comedy Club shows up under the pseudonym Whispers.
Legally, I don't know that it is Rumors Comedy Club, but yeah, there's a reference to a local comedy club.
There's a Viscount Court, I believe.
Yeah.
But
it's kind of, they used to put us up at the Viscount Gorks years ago. The Gorks, which strangely always smelled of oranges to me for some reason. And so, yeah, when I made, instead of the Tuxedo Plaza, is it Tuxedo Plaza? Yeah. Where Rumors is, I made it the Viscount Mall or Viscount Center or whatever. But yeah, it's just the idea of it's just a well-run, great comedy club that they're going to go from this nice comedy club on this run of small, remote, rural shows, which I think a lot of people, when they look at comedy, you see comedy on TV, you see, whatever, even the Improv, or you see people like Caroline's or what, you see comedians playing comedy clubs. And that's such a small portion of what we do. It's early days. It's really like going to places where, and I put this in the book, there's that moment where, because it's amazing how often this happens when you're a comedian starting out, you show up to whatever pub or cowboy bar where you're going to be doing your show, and you walk up and you say, hey, we're the comedians for tonight, and they go, oh, really? Is that tonight? Oh. You're just the last thing they want, right? Chris Finn, a very funny comedian, always called it comedy against your will. It's like you're going in, nobody wants you to be there telling your jokes, but you're getting paid to do what you gotta do it. There's people shooting pool, and so it's a lot, part of this for me, I wanted to touch on that, and just what it's like being low-level comedian, working your way through a lot of gigs that aren't ideal.
Yeah, and low level and up, because, you know, like you said, Dale is very good at what he does. He pays his bills doing it. He's not saving money. He's not, but this is the work. This is the work that's available. And a lot of it is spent, you know, in these clubs or in these bars, in these venues where they have to perform, in the car on the way to, and in the questionable hotel rooms built above these beverage rooms that they have to sleep in at night.
Yeah.
And if you did stand-up comedy in Canada, and I would imagine most anywhere else in the world, you're very familiar with that whole wash, rinse, and repeat of this is what you signed up for. This is you chasing your dream.
Yeah, but that, I mean, that's part of it too, that I touch in the book on this, is that as sort of crappy as it is, it's never lost on Dale that, and this is how I felt all the time, as bad as it got, as broke as it got, you know, because you're living hand to mouth, you know, you go on the road for 3 months and you come back with about $8 less than you had when you left, you know. It's just getting by, but it was never lost on me that, you know, I'm getting to live my dream. And there are a lot of people who don't get the opportunity to do that. And it's this weird, so it's weirdly, every sort of kick in the ribs that you get on the road is like a tangible reminder that, hey, you're living your dream. It's a weird dichotomous thing, but it was never lost on me.
You had a phrase in there that really tickled me that I jotted down, which is, you know, at the start of these runs, you're getting lumped in with other comics. And you might have met them before and loved them, might have met them before and not loved them, you might be meeting them for the first time. And stand-up comedy draws people from all kinds of places for all kinds of reasons. And so you're getting put in this car and put on the road for days on end with someone. And, you know, you have koalas and cobras put in the car together, traveling together. And I love that image of koalas and cobras in the same pen.
In the Comedy Zoo, they put cobras and koalas in the same cage for some reason. Yeah, you don't know what you're going to get, right? They'll say to you, okay, you're playing Edmonton, and then you'll do Red Deer, and then you go to Calgary and you meet a guy. It's from Montana. You're going to do 2.5 weeks with him on the road. And you're like, okay, never heard of this guy. And that was sort of the inspiration for the book, is there all those nights when you're in the car driving with somebody and that you've just met, and you're listening to their take on life, their thoughts on life, their thoughts on race, their thoughts on gender. And you're like, okay, this person is not wired up right at all. And if you push back a little bit and they start to get their hackles up, and you're like, okay, 2.5 weeks with this guy, right? And you're somewhere, northern Manitoba on your way to Ontario, and you're looking around thinking, there's a lot of places to hide my body. It's one of the great things about Canada, a lot of places to hide a body, So it's scary. I wanted to capture that dread of finding yourself in that situation. And it's also, again, it's a weird dichotomous situation where you're on the road with this person that you don't like or trust, but they're your only ally within 800 kilometers. They're the person you're dependent upon. It's not a great situation.
Yeah, you want to have their back and you want them to have yours. And sometimes you feel like it, sometimes you don't.
How many times have you been on the road with somebody and they talk about that, about, we have each other's back, and then they start a fight in a bar. Clearly their fault.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, am I in the fight now too because of your stupidity, because of your bad decision making? I'm gonna get a black eye? Great.
Where were you, Brent?
Yeah.
Where were you?
I was in a whole other fight outside in the parking lot. Where were you, man? Yeah, and there are a few fisticuffs in the book.
Did you want to read something?
Yeah, I'm happy to read a little something from the book. I have to thank Charlie Demers. I was having a hard time. I was thinking, because when you're doing these book events, this is the last one. I've done a number of them through October, because the book got released October 3rd. And they expect you to do a reading, and I was having a hard time picking. I didn't know what to pick to read, because you want something that relays the character, something that relays their situation, something that doesn't give too much away. You don't want to just read the ending, right? And then there was a giant explosion and everybody died. Thank you. Enjoy the book, everybody. But then Charlie Demers, who's a very funny stand-up, but also a successful author, writes great crime books. He said, quite out of the blue, he said, you know what I think you should read? I was like, what? Tell me, because I don't know. He picked this spot, and it's kind of perfect. It's about 5 or 6 minutes, I think, if you got nowhere to be. And I'll preface this with a couple of things. First of all, this is not corner gas. This is not primetime network television. So there is language in this book. I wanted to be very authentic to the situation. This is 3 comedians on the road, and if you think you can write a book about that without dropping the odd F-bomb, it's going to be very unauthentic. And I wanted this book to be real, and I wanted it to feel right. So if the odd F word offends your sensibilities, just quickly plug your ears. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that I'll just give you a little preamble so that this makes sense, because we're coming in partway through a scene. What's happening, all you need to know for this to make sense is that Hobie has gone on stage at this club where they're doing a show at this bar, and he has not only bombed terribly, but he's also pissed the crowd off hugely. He's turned them against him. The crowd is hating what's going on. And Rin and Dale are at the back watching, and Rin, who's emceeing the show, she says, well, I don't know how I'm going to get the crowd back from this, because they didn't like me, but they hate him. And Dale, who's been doing this a while, says that's how you get them back, the fact that they hate him. Go up and use their hatred of him to get them back. Throw him under the bus, make fun of him a little bit, and that will get them on your side, and we can maybe get the show back on the rails. So she goes up on stage and starts doing that, and it kind of works. When Hobie's done, she goes on stage, pokes fun at him a little bit, and how badly he's bombed, and it kind of turns things around, and the crowd is laughing. And Dale thinks to himself, hell, we might pull this off yet, he thought. The laughter didn't feel like salvation to Hobie, however. He watched, slack-jawed, as Rin roasted him, getting bigger and bigger laughs at his expense. He moved from the back wall slowly, drifting almost, as though her words were magnets drawing him forward. Dale looked at Hobie and saw a face he hadn't seen before. Anger? Not really. Pain? Maybe. It was hard to tell. His mind rifled through a dozen words to describe what he was witnessing. Then he said one softly, out loud, disconnected. That was the closest he could come up with. Whatever was happening behind those eyes, it wasn't good. Dale moved up beside Hobie. You might save our asses yet, pal. What? Hobie said in a hollow, drawn-out voice, eyes still fixated on Rin. This was my idea, Dale said. I told her that if she poked a bit of fun at you, it might get the crowd back. Hobie turned slowly to face Dale. You told her to do this? Yeah, she didn't want to, but I told her it was okay, Dale said. Told her you were strong enough to take it. Hobie seemed to wince a little, but his gaze was still distant, not yet reconnected. Take it, he said simply. Right, take one for the team. It's a move we have to do sometimes on the road in bad situations, but still, Dale said. Some guys I wouldn't want to do this with. They'd be all pissy about it, but I knew you'd get it. Hobie stared at Dale for what was likely 3 seconds, but felt like 11 minutes. Dale kept his eyes toward the stage, nice and calm. Don't say anything else. He'll come around. Ah, hell yeah, Hobie said. I get it. Dale looked into Hobie's eyes and saw he was back from whatever trip he had taken, and he was smiling. A flood of hot relief washed over him, but he played it cool. I knew you would. The crowd was in a much better mood by the time Rin finished her last bit, and the room was a lot lighter. There was comedy on the stage and laughter in the air, and all was as it should be. It was time to bring up the headliner to knock the whole thing out of the park. Please welcome to the stage, all the way from Chicago, Illinois, the hilarious Dale Webley, Rin said, her voice rising to a crescendo. Dale stepped on stage to hearty applause, pulled the microphone from the clip, and moved the stand to the back of the stage. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. And keep that applause going for your MC, Rin Lanigan, he said, and the applause swelled. Earlier transgressions were erased, a few more drinks had been swilled, and it was time for some fun. Dale launched into 7 straight minutes of local material, starting with what he thought of the name Horsewater for a community. Makes me wonder what names were voted down, he said. Pig Puddle? Goat Soup? Come on, that would have been a better name. I'm off to Goat Soup, Manitoba for the weekend. They were loving it. At the back of the room, Rin was watching Dale, studying him really. Dale had a smooth, no bullshit manner that put everyone at ease. Watching him was watching a person who was clearly in control, and the audience crawled into his hand. And when he took a few lighthearted jabs at their beloved Mickey, so after you opened a tavern in Horsewater, how long did it take you to come up with the name Horsewater Tavern? That is a creative genius right there, folks. Those folks fully submitted to his charms. Rin recognized the high level of skill and experience on display and was realizing how fortunate she was to have this opportunity. She could have been saddled on this run with some pedestrian hack of a headliner who would spend each night telling 45 minutes of dick jokes. Instead, she was going to spend 6 nights watching and learning from this guy. Invaluable. His advice on how to turn the room around and get the crowd back was brilliant. As she sat counting her blessings, Hobie loomed out of the darkness to stand beside her. Oh, hey, Rin said. Where have you been? Getting a beer, Hobie said, raising a bottle. He flopped down heavily in a chair next to her. You took some pretty good shots at me up there. Just taking a piss, she said. No hard feelings, I hope. You think I can't handle it? He said, low and slow. You think I can't take it? She wasn't quite sure what was happening. We sort of just met, so I have no idea what you can or can't take, she said. You'll let me know, though, yeah? A patch of dead air hung between them as they eyed each other. Then Hobie's gaze moved down to the table. You'd be surprised, he said, hovering his hand just above the tabletop. People are always surprised at what I can take. Okay, Rin said warily. Well, I don't really like surprises, so let's just leave it there. She waited for a response, but Hobie said nothing, still staring at his own hand. Her eyes followed his focus downward until she saw what he was doing and smelled it. The meaty pad on his palm was beginning to smolder above the flickering flame that danced on the tea candle. Jesus Christ, Hobie, she yanked his wrist back. What the fuck are you doing? Hobie turned his palm up to examine the small roasted patch, the center of which was almost black, then tilted his hand to show Rin. Ta-da, he said in a semi-melodic drone. I'm getting you some ice for that, Rin said, and don't do anything that fucking stupid around me ever again. Hobie grinned at her. You can't take it? She stood and headed for the bar. She asked the bartender for a glass of ice and shot a stern look over her shoulder back at Hobie. Stupid macho arsehole, why on earth would... Her thoughts stopped short as she noticed Hobie seemed to be having a discussion with someone, despite the fact he was sitting alone. His lips danced in mute conversation and his arms gesticulated. The bartender set the glass of ice in front of her, but she didn't move, continuing to stare at Hobie. Will there be anything else? The barman asked. I feckin' hope not, Rin said, and took the glass.
An excellent choice by Charlie Demers and a lovely passage. Yeah, that
it shows a bit of the this underlying dread that Dale and Rin have to go through with this guy, where they're just like, is he capable of anything?
yeah, you don't know where his personal boundaries are and whether he has any at all. And then they find out
More and more.
The book is set in the 90s. Tell me why you chose the 90s. I imagine it's an era that you're very familiar with, being on the road, doing those kind of gigs, because your career would have been about that time. But you evoked a lot of memories for me, the long distance phone cards. I had forgotten that I had to purchase prepaid phone card so that on the road I could dial long distance without either charging an arm and a leg to the hotel room that I'm in or doing the collector charging, right? And that was like such an innovation. And now,
it really was that. It was a case of like that. That was a time, like I started stand-up in the late 80s. And so late 80s into the mid 90s, I was really doing nothing but touring, playing small communities, big communities, but like touring every province, every territory, until they split up. And now I've never been to none of it. But before that, I've been to every province and territory. Now I got to get to
new places for you.
I know. So yeah, that was, a lot of that was in early mid 90s. And so it was just reflective of that time of what I was going through. And also there's the pragmatic decision of, a story like this told pre-cell phone makes it a little, in a contemporary version of this story.
There's more lifelines.
Yeah, there's more chances of getting out of it, but you would have just had to have Hobie take their phones, I guess, from them. But yeah, it was really having to wait till you got to the hotel or get to a payphone to call the booking agent to say, what is wrong with this guy that you booked us with?
And at the time, you're right. You can be gone for 2, 3, 4 days in a row without phoning somebody to say, hey, I'm fine. And nobody thinks of it, right?
Yeah, nobody thought anything of it. You're not going to hear from me for 2 or 3 days. No big deal. Now it's like, I phoned you and you didn't pick up right away. What's going on? Is everything okay? We've created a scenario where we catastrophize nonstop because we aren't able to get everybody, if you're not able to get somebody on the phone, you ever text somebody, they don't text you back 30 seconds later? You're like, do I call the police? What?
Dale has a scene at customs coming over the border that I identify very much with, which is I haven't done anything wrong and I don't plan to do anything wrong, but I still feel incredibly nervous, and any slight move on my part can be misinterpreted and I'll be sent home. And tell me, you captured that very well. And is that an experience that you have?
Yeah, I've had that experience. Yeah, crossing into the States, especially like early on. There were a couple times early on where I accepted a run of shows in the States without having the proper paperwork to work down there. Hypothetically, I don't know, there's probably a statute of limitations on that crime, right? Late 80s. I may have pretended to be from Minnesota when I was doing shows. But yeah, anyway, crossing the border, even at times when you're not doing anything wrong, everything is in order. There's just this assumption. I kind of described the way customs was set up to create this uncomfortable scenario, because it might it increases the chances of a trip up. If everybody is tense and edgy and slippery with sweat, there's a better chance that you're going to catch somebody trying to commit a crime.
And Dale does something unique, which is he'll think a thought in his head, and unbeknownst to him, he'll actually physically say the last few words. Is that something, where did that come from? Is that
something that I do now and then? Yeah. So I just incorporated it to him, because I spend a lot of time in my head, and sometimes I'll be thinking thoughts and then I'll say the last part of it out loud, whether I'm alone or with somebody else sometimes. So, there have been times when I've just been sitting there kind of daydreaming, and then I'll just go, buttered on both sides. Somebody will be like, what? Sorry, I was thinking of something. I was thinking of a grilled cheese sandwich. I was a whole different thing. So I put that in just because it's something that I do, and I kind of get a kick out of it. And it's a weird little thing, but it also shows, it develops from, spending so much time alone in bland hotel rooms by yourself that you end up having
inside voice and your outside voice.
Yeah. It's almost like they're talking to each other, your inside voice and your outside voice, because there's no one else to talk to.
That's really, really sad.
Yeah. Sadness and madness combined.
And a lot of the book is in hotel rooms, right? I mean, you drive, you check in, you have some time to kill until you go to work for just an hour, And you head down to the bar and face whatever's waiting for you and try to minimize everything that can go wrong, right? Survey the room, try to get the jukebox turned off.
Yeah,
and
that's one of the things I wanted to specifically touch on that. And it's one of the things that one of the feedback that I've been getting from people is they like how much they've learned about stand-up comedy. And because people don't understand sort of how delicate comedy is. And so when you go into these situations, you walk in a little ahead of the show and you just start scanning the room to see what is going to kneecap, what's going on here that is going to be difficult for the show, what's going to work counter to the show. There's TV on over there, there's people playing pool over there, and you do what you can before the show starts to mitigate as many of those things as you can, because little distractions can make the difference between a joke getting big laughs or blank stares. And I think people don't understand, and if they sometimes think, oh, you're being precious, but it's like, no, it's really a matter of it doesn't work with a slight distraction. It all needs focus.
Yeah, and it is strange how delicate it is, and you can go to one town one night and they think you're the funniest person in the world, and you drive to the next town and something's just not quite right. The sound's not quite right. The tables are spread out.
It's a red spotlight instead of a white spotlight.
Right.
And you're doing the exact same show, but now it's just weird. He's under red lights for some reason, like a rotisserie check.
Well, do we want to take some questions from the audience now? Is that a good time? Do people have had a chance? There's a gentleman at the back there.
Question right there.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much. Firstly, what would be the what's the a lot of them? I have a lot of questions, but I'll just go with the first among equals here.
Sure.
What was the most was there anything you thought of cuts on your own volition and that's just didn't seem right to you?
Like cuts to the story?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were quite a few. Like I said, I tend to overwrite knowing that I'm probably going to cut a lot of that. So some of it was glaring. But there were times when there were things that I thought, there were things that I liked that I just sort of realized are unnecessary. Almost, they're not crucial to the story. And I don't mind a little bit of that, but it's easy to have too much of that. And it's easy for a book to start to drag if you don't really hang yourself onto the story. People want story. It's primordial in us. And so that's one of the things I do. I look at what I'm writing, and and it can be difficult because sometimes you're cutting stuff you really like. It could be fun dialogue or a good joke. But years of writing for TV, you learn to do that anyway. You build a thick skin. You're like, oh, I really love this joke, but we're 2 minutes over and it's got to go, right? So you just realize, you just toughen up, and you just got to, and you try and squirrel it away. You go, well, I'm going to make memory of that joke. Maybe I can use it again somewhere else. But yeah, a lot of the big drastic cuts came from myself before anybody else saw it.
David, watching online, mentions that he believes that you mentioned somewhere that you like graphic novels and cartoons. I was curious to know if there was any interest in making this novel into a graphic novel or something similar.
Not really. I do like to draw. I've drawn comic books, and I have an ongoing comic strip right now on my Substack that I send out every Monday, Friday to subscribers. It's about a guy being quasi-possessed by a little demon who's trying to learn about humanity. But I don't want to take on a job that big of drawing. Like when it was soul crushing when I was drawing comic books. You draw at twice the size and then you shrink it down. So you have this big sheet of poster board or Bristol board and it's blank, and you spend days filling it all in. And then you're done and you peel it away and there's another blank page staring at you. It's just a kick in the face every time. And I just realized early on, I like to draw. I don't love it enough to do it for a living. I like to do it now and then, little pops. But you know, if somebody else was interested in doing it, I'm open to that idea, but I think this lends itself to TV or film. I'm open to somebody coming along, getting the rights to that. Because I have a TV and film production company, I think a lot of people wonder if I'm gonna make it into a movie, but I'm much more interested in, because I've never done something like this before, I'm much more interested in somebody who knows how to
this
make.
is the movie of that book.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll show you the movie of that.
Who really
book.
knows how to do it, like a really good film director, really good screenwriter who can adapt a novel. And so, you know, I love the idea of just sitting back, Stephen King style, and just watching to see what these filmmakers do with it. I like that.
What would be your preference, film or
I
series?
think it lends itself to a film better because it's quite claustrophobic in a way.
Right.
My manager pointed out there's some similarities between my story and Misery, just in the structure of, just in the claustrophobic nature of it.
Hi.
Hello.
I haven't had the pleasure of reading your book yet, and I know that it's not a crossover, but I'm just wondering whether any of the bodies are buried in Willerton.
Yeah, he's crossing universes now. I think that's a Marvel DC situation. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where the bodies are buried. It's outside my purview of, Hobie didn't tell me where the bodies are buried.
How pleasantly surprised have you been to the reaction, this being a psychological thriller, and does it allow you to push the boundaries even further if you work on another novel in the future?
Well, I've been very pleasantly surprised with the reaction, because that was a natural concern going into it, saying, you know, I've spent 35 years doing, you know, fairly, you know, family-friendly comedy for the most part. 35 years of just being a funny guy. And then to do something like this, you know, I didn't know how people were going to react to it, but at the same time, I don't do things to get reactions from people. I do things because they're in my head and they got to get out. And then you cross your fingers, you hope people like it. But I knew I was writing this the way I was going to write it, and didn't know, maybe nobody would like it. So the response has been fantastic, both from the general public, people who've read the book, the reviews online have been more than I could ask for, you know.
How nervous were you? Was it like out of 10? 10 being I can't sleep or eat, and 2 being like, well, people don't like it.
Yeah, it was more like that. It was much closer to a 2, because for me it was like I was much more nervous about. I was more nervous that I would write this novel, do as many passes of it as I could, and that I would have this notion that I'm looking at a piece of garbage. I don't like this. I don't think it worked. That was my bigger fear. And so by the time I'd, you know, finished writing the manuscript a number of times and got it to where I wanted it, and I read it through and I said, I like this. I've been through this 100 times and I'm still not bored by this story. I feel like I've done what I wanted to do, and I feel like I did a good job. That was the thing I was nervous about. And then, like I said, it's just a matter of you hope people like it, but it's not why I was doing it, so. Craig Charleston, everybody. I have a copy of your book.
Do you really?
Yeah, I want you to sign Samurai Bluegrass.
Oh my
Very
goodness.
great book. There's a local writer here. You live right in Winnipeg, don't you?
I do actually.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say anything. I'll just let you go. Yeah. Tisdale. Yeah, sorry, you threw me there. I really like this book a lot. In fact, I love this book.
Thank you.
I was amazed by how you were able to hold the suspense, because, you know, there's a part about 3/4 of the way through, I go, well, he's not gonna be able to keep doing this, because now we've really seen the nature of Hobie. How are you gonna still write the last quarter of this book? And it's, for those who haven't read it yet, it's a ride. It's a major ride. But I'm really curious what you're saying about structure, because you mentioned the structure of Corner Gas. And so when I think about the structure, you said Linwood gave you some constructive criticism. But what I'm wondering about is, do you look at other novelists, or like when you're thinking about how the structure, because you know, a TV program will have those 3 acts or whatever, a novel does too. But do you learn from, like, or do you read other crime novelists, or how did you put the structure of this thing together? Because as a debut novel, I was just like, this guy's been writing forever, you know, so I was like really impressed by it. So I just wondered if you could just say something about the structure.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in structure. And that's how I first found you, was I found you have a Substack about story structure. And I'm kind of a nerd about story structure. I believe in it, and I like to see what people do and what their thoughts are on structure and how they do things. So I started following you there. And, you know, coming from a TV and film background, where it is very structured, but the notion is, I think, every story sort of has a similar structure. And I write, you know, it's kind of that standard divided into 4 chunks. You know, the first act, the second act is twice as long as the first, and then, you know, you have the other 1/4% of your story is the third act. But I basically, you know, break it into 4. And I do that when whatever I read, any book that I read, the first thing I do, I'm trying to be very careful not to spoil anything for myself. I get to the last page, I see what the page number is. And it's like 370. Okay, this book has 370 pages. So halfway through, I got to do the math, which now I've painted myself in the corner because it's so long to do the math. But so that's what, 150, 100, was that halfway through? 185? Thank God Dean is here. And I'll go to 185 and I'll dog ear it. And then I'll go, okay, what's half of 185? And I'll go there and I'll dog ear it. So now and I do that for the third. So I have the book broken down into 4 equal chunks. And I consciously look at how close to that structure do different authors stick to, some are probably not even aware that they're doing it, but it is amazing how often there's the mid story twist right there within 5 or 10 pages of the mathematical middle of the book, and how often they're diving into adventure. Their adventure begins 25% of the way into the book, the same way it does 25% in the film. So story, I think for whatever reason, it's in us 1,000 generations. The most effective stories we've developed this structure. This is how, and they could be completely, you know, enormously different. It can be Jaws and Willy Wonka, and you look at it and you go, they break at the same points. So I kind of do that. I sit down and I structure, I draw out a little framework. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know the points that I want to get to. But one of the things I've started doing now, I saw an interview with Quentin Tarantino where he said when he writes a script, he only plots half of it, because there's no point in plotting the second half, because through writing the first half, you're going to come up with better stuff. And that really hit home to me, because I've always said the phrase, I can't write very well outside of writing. Some people can. They can go for a walk with a dog and they can plot a book. For me, it all comes as I'm writing. If I'm not, it's because I lack focus. My mind's a million different places, but when I'm writing, I'm focusing. And you start to say, oh, I see where he needs to go. Oh, he needs to do this. This actually won't work because that character can't be there. That I can only do it when I'm writing. So it's only so productive for me to plot the second half of the book, because I know it's going to change. It even did with Huge. I had a different ending in mind, but by the time I got, you know, maybe, you know, a little over halfway through, I came up with better ideas.
So Diane loved the book, thought it was amazing. I was wondering if you were considering a sequel or revisiting the world at all.
The publisher has asked me because I'm writing another book now that is a standalone, has nothing to do with this. It's also a dark psychological thriller, and I'm well into it. And that's probably going to be the next thing that I write or try to put out. But I've been asked if there's a sequel by the publisher, and I sort of know what I want it to be, and it takes place about 10 years after this book. So I think there could be a sequel. I'm certainly open to a sequel.
And we do have time for one more question right over here.
When you began writing, did you have the names of the characters in mind, or did you choose the name after the character was developed?
I spend way too much time coming up with character names. Just sitting at a yellow legal pad and just coming up with different names. And then it's weird how like every now and then just one of them will hit you, right? One of them will just go, like I don't even know I've never heard the name Rin before. And I remember I wrote it down and it was like, oh, it's like Lynn, but with an R. But I'd never seen it before. And I was just like, well, that's gonna be her name. But it changes sometimes too. I think with Dale, the first draft, or at least the first draft of the first few chapters, I seem to recall, I can't think of what it was, but I had a different last name from Dale. Sometimes they just feel right, and sometimes they feel wrong, and you got to go back and I don't know what it is. It's a weird intangible thing, but you're just like, this guy isn't Dale Moonley. He's got to be Dale Webley. So I don't know where that comes from, but I do know that I spend more time than I should coming up with character names.
No, thank you so much. So I'll be back in a moment to go over signing procedure, but if you folks have any closing comments, voice of God.
Sorry, I was distracted. What are we doing now? I was thrown by the interdimensional quality.
Oh, I think he's giving us a chance to wrap it up.
Oh,
Let me ask you quickly.
See, comedy and terror are very closely related. People don't understand how they're siblings.
That's kind of the invisible button right there. I'm curious. This is just for my own personal satisfaction. I don't know if this is interesting. As somebody who watches a lot of movies where the violence becomes cartoonish and you're like, well, that person should be dead by now. How much attention or research did you put into saying, okay, what can I have them do before medically this becomes impossible? That, this person did that to somebody and they still get up and right, and then you don't want this villain to become Jason Voorhees and you can put 80 bullets in them and they just get up and come at you.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I think I kept it pretty realistic. And Hobie puts Dale and Rin through some things, but he doesn't put them through the things he could put them through. Partly because he has a fondness for them, even though he realizes he gets very angry with them and he wants to punish them. He doesn't do everything he could to them. And to the extent that they're able to, they fight back. But I think I kept it within. I haven't had anybody think it seems far-fetched.
No, and I didn't either. So I was curious how much attention you put to that and saying, how close can I get to that?
Probably subconsciously, it was probably in there. I think, anytime you're writing a story, if you're trying to write a realistic story, you get red flags as you're writing. Sometimes you're like, that would never happen, right? But I think it was fairly organic. It stuck. It's pretty realistic. And it was one of the things I was really chuffed about was when the publisher first read this and they said, man, you really write fight scenes well. Like, have you written a lot of fight scenes?
Have you witnessed a lot of fights?
I've had my nose broke a few times, but you grow up in rural Saskatchewan, you're going to get into some dust-ups,
Fantastic. Well, that's a solid note to end on.
I've had my nose broke a few times. Good night, everybody.
So we will be moving along to the signing now. So we'll ask you all to remain in place for one moment while we safely transport Brent over to a table just beside our cash desk, and then you'll be free to wander over and get books signed. We have copies of Huge at the table. We have copies of Huge at the cash desk. So please do avail yourself of a copy. You can get it signed before you pay for it. Just please do remember to pay for the book. We are so very grateful to all the people that came together to make this afternoon a possibility, to Doubleday Canada, Penguin Random House of Canada, of course, the Winnipeg Comedy Festival. And I'd ask all of you to join me one more time in acknowledging Dean Jenkinson and Brent.
If you don't want to be on my Instagram, cover your face.